Chapter 3. Suggestion of habit and repetition. The suggestion of habit. This form of suggestion is closely allied to the preceding phase, i.e. suggestion of association. In fact, some consider it to be merely a branch of the latter. But we feel that there is a decided difference in the operation of the two phases, and accordingly prefer to treat this one as forming a separate and distinct phase. Of course, all habit is an association with something in the past, but suggestion of habit may arise from an original cause of suggestion of authority, suggestion of association, suggestion of repetition, suggestion of imitation, or else from an original decision of the intellect resulting from correct reasoning. The suggestive feature of suggestion of habit arises not from the nature of its original cause, but from the fact that the previous action or thought acts as a suggestion for the act or thought of the present. The former act or thought acts as a suggestive outside influence, although it belongs to one's own mentality. It is astonishing to many of us, when occasionally we are brought to a realization of the degree of habit action and habit thought that has been developed within us. We do things simply because we have done them before, notwithstanding the fact that the circumstances of the case have altered materially. Suggestion and autosuggestion. Think thoughts, and hold opinions, simply because we have thought so in the past, although the circumstances may have altered materially. We get into a jog-trot of habit, we fall into the rut of routine and lose initiative thereby. The suggestion of habit is strong with the majority of us. There is a very good excuse for this development of the suggestion of habit, for the majority of our daily actions and activities are possible only through having learned them by heart. In order to perform our tasks we must have first learned them consciously, and with much expenditure of concentrated attention, and then, having learned them, we have passed them over to the habit mind of the subconsciousness, that they thereafter be performed automatically, and thus easily. The new psychology recognizes the important part played by habit in mental operations and physical activities, and therefore urges its students to cultivate the habits which will be beneficial to them, and to inhibit those which may prove detrimental. And it is in this same spirit that we are now calling your attention to the effect of the suggestion of habit. We are not advising that you do away with habit, but that you select good habits of thought and action, and then trust to them. The mind of man is plastic, particularly in youth, the period in which the majority of our mental and physical habits are formed. As Romanes well states, no change in childhood's early day. No storm that raged, no thought that ran, but leaves a track upon the clay, which slowly hardens into man. In our book on the new psychology we have given directions whereby habits may be cultivated, restrained, or inhibited, which we shall not repeat here. The realization of the effect of suggestion of habit will call your attention to the need of taking account of the same, in the direction of restraint and suggestion of habit and repetition. Improvement. To realize the force of habit, try the following simple tests. Try to put on the other shoe first, in the morning. Each of us has the habit of putting on first one particular shoe, in preference to the other. Change to the other shoe, and you will find it awkward, and for some time afterward you will have a subconscious feeling that something is wrong, or has been forgotten. Or, try to put the other arm in your coat sleeve first. Each of us has a certain way of putting on a coat, the same arm first each time, and if a change is made the utmost awkwardness is manifested. Each of us gets out of bed on one particular side, and we dress according to rule, in the same way. Try the experiment of putting on a stocking, and then put on the shoe of the same foot instead of proceeding to draw on the second stocking, and see how mixed up you will feel. The older we become, the more we are apt to become set in our habits of action and thought. We accept the suggestion of habit, instead of using initiative, or original thought. How many people are Republicans or Democrats, as the case may be, simply because they started out so without regard to any new issues, or local question. They may make high resolves to do something, but when the election day comes around they fall in line like well-drilled soldiers. Many of us belong to certain churches for the same reason. We have just gotten into the habit of it, and no attraction can lure us to pastures new. We cross the streets at certain corners, on our way home just because we started out that way. And we hold certain fixed ideas, not because of any special truth or merit in them, but simply because we once accepted some suggestion or statement along the same lines, and thenceforth adopted it as our own, and now swear by it as if we had thought it out carefully and intelligently. In fact, the ideas that we fight the hardest for are very apt to be those which we have made our own by the suggestion of habit rather than those which we have thought out carefully. Bigotry and intolerance, narrow-mindedness, and mental stubbornness arise largely from this suggestion and autosuggestion. Habit. Suggestion of habit does not allow the person to see any other side of a question. His subconsciousness has the fixed idea firmly impressed upon it, from habit, and it requires a mighty wrench to dislodge and cast out the record. The majority of our ideas are the result of this form of suggestion. This being so, it is well for us to take mental stock occasionally, and apply the test of present knowledge and reason to our inmost convictions, the majority of which we would not think of accepting today, were they presented to us as new propositions to be examined and judged by the reason. The suggestion of repetition. This form of suggestion may seem to be very much akin to the preceding phase, i.e. suggestion of habit. But there is a marked distinction and difference. Suggestion of habit has its power imparted to it by the habitual repetition of the act or thought on the part of the individual, while suggestion of repetition gains its power and force by the repetition of a suggestion from some outside object or person. It is an axiom of suggestion that suggestion gains force by repetition. A suggestion of but moderate impressive or penetrative power in the first instance gains force and power at each repetition. It is the old story of the repeated blows of the hammer driving in the nail, or the constant dripping of water wearing away the stone. A suggestion which passes you without much attention or consideration, when first made, will gain both attention and consideration from you if it be repeated sufficiently often, and in the right manner. Repeated suggestion tends to break down the instinctive powers of resistance in a person, unless the person realizes that it is a suggestion and thereupon interposes an obstacle to the impression. Many things that you accept as beyond question have been impressed upon you by the force of repetition. You hear a thing on all sides, and although you may have no knowledge or proof of it, still you are affected by it, and gradually grow to accept it as at least a presumptive fact. Repeated, they say, has ruined the reputation of many a person. A repeated statement. Suggestion of habit and repetition. Or claim of fact often obtains credence without possessing any basis in truth. Many utterly foolish superstitions and ridiculous notions have become current because of repetition. The whole matter is understood when one begins to understand the nature of the subconscious mind, and the region of the memory. In these regions of the mind there is preserved a mental record or impression of each thing that comes to the attention of the person. And these impression records are strengthened by each repetition of the thing. The realization of this law gives us the key to the development of the memory, and also to the understanding of suggestion of repetition. The process and the rule is the same in both cases. If you wish to impress a thing upon the records of your memory, you know that repetition is one of the most effective methods. Each impression of the die of attention deepens the original record impression. And in suggestion of repetition, each time the suggestion is made and accepted, the record impression is made deeper. You have heard the old story of the person who told the tale so often that he grew to believe it himself, have you not? Well, this idea of suggestion of repetition is along the same lines. You hear a thing so often that you get to believe it yourself, its repetition giving to it an air and appearance of validity, and causing you to involuntarily imagine that you have always believed it. Who has not known persons who vigorously combated certain ideas in the beginning, and who afterward yielded to the insistent repeated suggestions of others regarding the thing, until she accepted them and finally asserted that he had always so held? Many a shrewd judge of human nature, along the lines of salesmanship and advertising, understand this law of suggestion of repetition. They will artfully manage to get in repeated suggestions, by presenting the same statements in different terms, or else by a flat repetition of an authoritative statement, until you forget the beginning, and the idea grows to be an old story with you, and one that you never seem to question. Suggestion and autosuggestion. Have heard of a politician of national renown, who once said, "Proof. We don't need proof. Tell the public a thing solemnly and authoritatively and repeat it sufficiently often, and you will never need to prove anything." Repetition, like pretended authority, are two old frauds masquerading as truth. When you once take their measure, you have disarmed them so far as you are concerned. When you call for proof, they take refuge in dignity and reiteration that is their entire stock in trade. But suggestion of repetition has its value in imparting truth. It is a poor rule that won't work both ways. Chapter 4. Suggestion of imitation. The suggestion of imitation, this form of suggestion, while being in itself a distinct phase of suggestion, nevertheless has a very close relationship with the several other forms of suggestion. In the acceptance of suggestion of authority there is to be found an unconscious imitation of the mental attitude of the person asserting the authority. In suggestion of association there is an imitation of the associated thing, and in suggestion of repetition there is to be found evidences of imitation. But still, suggestion of imitation forms a distinct phase of suggestion, in itself. Man is an imitative animal. There is to be found in the human race a decided degree of the faculty of imitation which plays such an important part in the lives of our cousins the apes and monkeys. Many persons who would resent any such comparison, nevertheless evince a constant desire to imitate and follow the actions, thoughts, and appearance of those around them. Individuality is a far more rare thing than is generally imagined. In fact, let a man show individuality of taste and action, and he is looked upon as queer, and is avoided as out of the ordinary by the majority of people unless he is sufficiently strong to force his ideas upon the crowd and thus. Suggestion and autosuggestion. Set the fashion. We live in an era of imitation, notwithstanding our claims of individuality. Our civilization demands that we wear the same cut of clothing, the same width of hat brim, the same kind of haircut, and the same color of neckwear under the penalty of being called eccentric. We copy the attitudes, appearance, tones, and little personal peculiarities of some prominent person, seemingly imagining that by so doing we may absorb his qualities. We think the thoughts of others, and share their ideas, according to the same law of suggestive imitation. Ideas, as well as clothes, have their fashion. Our churches and our playhouses fall in line with the examples set them by others who have caught the public notice. There is very little room for the individual who prefers his own ways to those of the leaders of fashion who set the public example. It is get in line, or get out. Some actress wears a new gown of a striking cut, color, or trimming, and the world of womankind falls in line. Sometimes it is fashionable to be plump, sometimes the style changes to the svelte willowness of the directoire gown. The dressmakers and milliners of Paris deliberately coin new styles in order that there may be a demand for the new articles among those who follow the fashions, and the remainder of the people are gradually forced into an acceptance of the arbitrary styles. A new monarch causes a complete change in the accepted styles of walk, carriage, and personal peculiarities, and even in republics the same thing is being manifested, each president causing a manifestation of the desire to follow the lead in the way of exercise, personalities, etc. An era of calm dignity is followed by an era of strenuousness. An epoch of tennis is followed by one of golf, according to the tastes of the respective leaders. Philosophies, theories, schools of thought and branches of religious denomination are accepted because they are fashionable. The old trick of the practical joker illustrates suggestion of imitation. The joker pauses on a crowded thoroughfare, and suggestion of imitation. Gazes intently at an imagined something up in the air, or else on the roof of a skyscraper. In a few moments others stop and gaze upward, then others, and so on until the policemen come to disperse the crowd. We follow the motion of a tightrope walker, swaying in unison with him. We imitate the facial expression of the actor on the stage, frowning or smiling as he does. We catch ourselves imitating the walk or physical motions of persons in whose company we are, and there are but few persons who are immune to the intonation or brogue of those with whom they associate. The New Englander falls into the localisms and accent of the West or South if he lives there for a time. The Southerner loses his soft accent when he lives away from home, and is only aware of the change in himself when he happens to return home for a visit, when his folks notice how Yankeefied he has become, and he notices the extreme Southern accent among his friends and relatives. We have a personal knowledge of a young physician, of English-Scotch ancestry, not a drop of German blood in his veins, who spent several years in Germany in the universities and hospitals. When he returned to America he was a German in accent, habits, appearance, and tastes. So marked was the change, that he finally settled in a German quarter of the town in which he lived, and practiced exclusively among Germans and persons of German descent, preferring their company and customs, and fitting closely into their requirements and preferences. Contrast the children of foreign parents in this country, see how different they are from their parents in every way. Sometimes the change is an improvement and sometimes it is a throwing away of the good old qualities and an acquiring of the new objectionable ones. Environment plays a very important part in our lives. And environment is largely the effect of suggestion of imitation, that tendency of the race to level itself up or down, to get into line, to be in the fashion. Have you ever noticed the contagiousness of mental states, or actions, as evidenced in the daily press? Let there be an suggestion and auto-suggestion, elopement, and immediately there are many others of the same kind. Crimes repeat themselves in the same way, even to details. Suicides are suggested in many cases by reading public prints. This fact is recognized by psychologists, and an effort is being made to prohibit the rehearsal in the newspapers of objectionable occurrences. The cheap moving picture shows have come under the supervision of the authorities, because of this fact of suggestion of imitation. Young people seeing crimes and other immoralities exhibited in the pictures, display a tendency to imitate them. The stage has a marked effect upon the morals of the people, not in the way of instruction as many assume, but in the way of suggestion by imitation. This form of suggestion is attracting much notice from students of sociology and civic progress, and is bound to come to the front during the next 10 years. The public has the tendency to follow the suggestions of the things presented to its notice. The remedy is suggested in the evil itself. If undesirable things are imitated, then counteract the evil by prohibiting the same as far as is possible, and neutralize it by presenting the desirable things to the attention in an attractive way. The phase of suggestion of imitation, connected with the health of the people, is also receiving marked attention from the authorities and molders of public opinion of late. It is recognized that the printing of the advertisements and literature of certain patent medicines and other remedies is calculated to react upon the health of the public. These advertisements, with their recital of symptoms, including every possible known physical and mental feeling, sensation, ache or pain, undoubtedly impress many people with fear and imaginary complaints. This would be bad enough in itself, but is rendered doubly evil by the fact that these imaginary complaints have a tendency to materialize into actual physical troubles, by the effect of therapeutic suggestion. Thought tends to take form in action, and mental pictures tend to become real in the physical realm. Fear in itself is a powerful suggestion of imitation. Depressant, bound to react upon the physical functions and to impair the physical well-being of the person manifesting it. A community may enjoy a very good health record, but flood it with objectionable advertisements and printed matter containing a recital of symptoms, illustrated with pictures of diseased organs, and in a short time there will be more cases of sickness in the place than ever before in its history. These are proven scientific facts, known to every student of the subject. The moral is obvious. You will find that the instances of suggestion of imitation are far more common, and far greater in number, than those of any of the other forms of suggestion. This is because the causes operating along these lines are far more common and numerous. There is ever present a great supply of the raw material for suggestion of this kind. The tendency of the race to get into line, to follow my leader, to act like human sheep or geese makes it easy for them to fall into the habit of accepting these suggestions. You have heard of the custom of sheep to follow the actions of the leader. It is said that if the leader jumps over a rail of a fence, the rest of the flock will follow, and if the rail be removed, the rest of the flock will continue jumping over the place where the rail had been. In this phase of suggestion, as well as the others previously mentioned, there is of course the reverse side of the question to be considered. We have shown you how easily people are affected to their detriment, and to the advantage of others who influence them. But it is equally true, and much more worthy of the race, that people may also be influenced for good in the same way. The suggestion of authority has its advantageous side, for in this way a worthy strong person or body of people may impose the knowledge of good upon those not so well informed. The crowd will accept it by reason of authority, before their reasons can grasp the why of it. In the same way suggestion by association may operate for good, providing the associations are desirable. And suggestion of habit, and suggestion and auto-suggestion. Suggestion of repetition may become great sources of right action, providing the moving cause is good. And so, suggestion of imitation becomes a mighty power for righteousness in the hands of the right persons, and when conducted along the right lines. Those who set good examples, and fashions, influence people just as do those who are at the opposite pole of precept. Good health is just as contagious as disease. When suggestion of imitation is well understood by the public generally, there will be a demand for the suppression of the things giving the hurtful suggestions, and for the encouragement and advancement of those setting good examples, and furnishing the right kind of suggestions. The remedy is plain: it is for the people to use it. Chapter V. Instances of suggestion. And looking around about us for the purpose of gathering instances of typical forms of suggestion, we are embarrassed by a wealth of material. Instead of having to hunt for such instances, we rather find it difficult to escape the numerous instances of the use of suggestion which insistently push themselves upon us from all directions. Suggestion is an active motive principle of human conduct that we find ourselves unable to escape from evidences of its operation, when once we have had our attention directed to the subject. We pick up the morning paper, and there we see hundreds of instances which will work their suggestive influences, for good or evil, upon the ends of those who read them. Here is related the example of some man who has given his life for humanity, and someone will accept the suggestion, and his life will be influenced by the example of this man. Here is related the thieving achievements of some shrewd hierophant of frenzied finance, whose example will be noted and acted upon by some of its readers. Here is the recital of a crime, suicide, or scandal, which will plant its suggestive seed in some congenial soil, there to grow into action. Here is some inspiring bit of news, which sends a suggestive thrill through us, and nerves us to higher end. Suggestion and auto-suggestion. Better effort high the day's work. Here is some depressing item of news, calculated to hatch forth pessimistic thought and philosophies in some mind ready for the suggestion. Here is the speech of some world worker, in which is a wealth of inspiring and stimulating suggestion, and next to it is the reverse. And so it goes, each seed suggestion being extremely likely to find lodgment in the receptive mind of persons in harmony with the respective idea. And turning to the advertising pages, we find the same thing repeated. The virtues of certain brands of baby foods, or painkillers, are fastened upon our minds by suggestive notices based upon the principles of suggestion, of authority, or repetition, respectively. We are told that you need a biscuit, or that ivory soap floats, or that puffed rice is shot from guns, or that babies cry for Castoria, or that somebody's whiskey is smooth, or that Puffer's cigars are fragrant, or that Pilkins' purple pills will cure that tired feeling, and so on. Leaving our homes and entering the streetcars, elevated trains, or suburban expresses, as the case may be, we find ourselves confronted with startling signs extolling the wares of various manufacturers, each containing some shrewdly worded phrase, telling us either to do something or else that a certain thing is true, in both instances the statement being connected with certain articles of merchandise. We gaze upon cleverly drawn pictures of men arrayed in nicely fitting coats or neat hats, and involuntarily contrast our old clothes or hats with the pictured elegance, and thereby set into operation a train of thought which sooner or later leads us to invest in some of the articles in question. These advertisements seek first to arouse desire within us, and then to drive it home and transform thought into action, by suggestion of repetition. Leaving our car, we find the store windows filled with a suggestive display of attractive things, calculated to arouse desire for possession within our minds. The art of window display is first to attract the attention by the artistic appearance of the instances of suggestion display, and then to arouse desire within us by the quality and appearance of the goods, with a subtle appeal to our bargain instinct by a display of low prices specially marked down for the W. Ashington's birthday clearing sale. From first to last it is this effort to arouse attention, and to create desire. Look at the crowd of women clustered around the shop windows, gazing longingly upon some attractive display of clothing or hats, or the 1,001 other things so dear to the feminine heart. Don't you realize that out of that crowd there will be some whose want to will be so vigorously aroused, that the suggestive seed idea will be sure to blossom into active must-have-it in a day or so? There are schools for advertising, which carefully instruct their pupils in the laws of psychology in this matter of attracting attention and arousing desire. Do not suppose for a moment that this clever advertising just happens to catch your eye, and arouse your desire, not a bit of it. These skilled advertisers, who are paid very large salaries, have been carefully trained in the laws of suggestion, and they put their knowledge into practice every day of the week, with a little extra touch on Sunday. There is one man employed by a large advertising agency in New York and Chicago. He spends part of his time each week in each city, traveling on fast limited trains at night in order to lose no time, who is paid a salary reputed to be equal to that of the President of the United States. And his work, and the value of the same, is along the line of the most clever employment of suggestive words, display, and presentation of the advertisements of the various customers of that agency. Did you think that you bought a certain article because you were convinced from careful examination that it was just what you needed? Nonsense! You bought it because the scientific advertiser had exerted his suggestive art upon you, first by treating your attention by a striking display of his advertisements, and then by the insistent and repeated epigrammatic statements regarding the fact that you, yes you, needed that particular article. Reason, indeed Suggestion and auto-suggestion. You were suggested into it by a series of suggestive pictures and clever phrases. Of course the article is good, and you got your money's worth, but that does not alter the principle. Then you go into a store, or else a salesman calls at your office. Some of these salesmen, or saleswomen, repel you and you do not care to deal with them. Others have a winning way about them, and before long you are placing your orders. Did you suppose that it was just because these salespeople were pleasant, intelligent, and courteous? Dear me, you are far behind the times. Of course a pleasant manner, intelligence, and a desire to please have great value in salesmanship, and will always reap their reward in orders and pleased customers, but even this is not always the result of natural inclination, and even if it is, there is more to the thing than that. Do you know that there are numerous schools of salesmanship springing up in all parts of the country, instructing the students in what do you suppose? In the psychology of salesmanship. Teaching them the psychological laws that are to be found in every sale, teaching them the nature and value of suggestion in selling goods. And not only this, but many of the large concerns employing solicitors have private courses in salesmanship, in which their salesmen are carefully drilled and trained how to approach people properly, how to present their proposition, how to meet objections, and how to use suggestion. The modern businessman has received his education in psychology, and is applying it in his everyday business. We are not objecting to this personally. We would rather deal with a trained salesman than with a clumsy, untrained, raw recruit. We are merely calling your attention to the important part played by suggestion in everyday business life. Your day's business takes you into a courtroom, and lo, you find suggestion there. You see a witness on the stand, in the hands of a clever lawyer who is drawing out the desired information by a clever line of suggestive questionings. The much decried leading questions of the lawyers, which are instances of suggestion, subject to objection from the opposing side, are but forms of suggestion. The up-to-date lawyer does not need to use the leading question. Instead, he subtly starts certain trains of thought in the mind of the witness, by accenting certain words, etc., and thus accomplishes the same end. Listening to a clever cross-examination by an expert is equal to a preliminary course in suggestion. And then, you will find an employment of suggestion in the address of counsel to the jury. A sentimental association is aroused by reference to something likely to have been experienced by some of the jurymen, prejudices are aroused by suggestion and insinuation, doubt is cast on the statements of opposing witness by a subtle tone and expression, where words would have aroused suspicion. And so on to the end. And even in the judge's charge, unconscious suggestion is used, although many judges will indignantly deny this fact. If a judge inclines toward a certain side of a case, by reason of his own prejudices or conviction, he will often unconsciously impart that leaning by suggestion in his charge. This all jurymen know, and they will tell you that in some way they became impressed with the true beliefs of the judge, even although the charge was delivered in a most impartial manner with carefully chosen words. The suggestion was manifested in the emphasis unconsciously placed upon certain facts or words. And, if the case goes to a higher court, on appeal, this suggestive accent or emphasis is missing from the printed words, if and but, which turn the scale in the jury box. After the day's work, you start to return home, when you are confronted with a big blinking electric sign, telling you to take home a box of Ryler's chocolates for your wife. And of course you do. Over the coffee, at dinner, your wife innocently informs you that your best friend has presented his wife with a new set of furs that are so becoming, and she wonders if the friend is not an exceptionally able businessman to be able to be so liberal, and then he is so kind and thoughtful of his wife and family. Thus is the fur seed suggestively planted in good rich soil. Never fear, it will be well watered with tears, and watched with shy, loving glances, until it blossoms into realization a little later on. And that night, in your sleep, you will dream of something connected with business that will suggest something else that will have an effect on your actions the next day in your business. You cannot escape suggestion, even in sleep.